Hello, welcome to Learn with BMW Swale. In this session, we are continuing to introduction of OOP in Python, part 3.2. In the last session, we introduced class method, but now we'll focus on static method. We gave examples of class method. It's time to highlight more about static method. And please, these are core concepts of object-oriented programming. Static method. So before we even give some examples in practice, we have to first know what static methods are. Basically, static method belongs to the namespace of the particular class, but does not accept implicit first argument of self or CLC of a class attribute. I'm saying that static method belongs to the namespace of the particular class. So I have loved giving these examples over and over, which is a customer class that we have been defining in the first video that we made. So this customer class will be defining static method. So they basically also belongs in a particular class, but they perform certain operation that they do not accept arguments in any definition. They do not accept arguments of such keyword self or CLC. This is a keyword, or not necessarily keyword, but agreementable word that has been used in class method. We explain this as well. So start method never accepts such arguments, but they can receive plain argument. Any parameter that can be passed, but we shall never prescribe them using these words. All right. So the behavior of this static method, they behave as standard functions, standard isolated functions. They behave as standard functions and isolated functions. That is the behavior. So while talking of the behavior of this static method, they really don't provide useful operation in classes like a customer class, but we usually get these static methods to provide some useful operation, right? So we will be always lapping this static method in classes. Lapping is just whereby grouping set of methods that give certain functions. Like you have been observing, math is square, that method which returns the square of a particular argument that is passed. So such kind of methods are commonly known as static methods. Yeah. So are the things that we'll be creating as static method. Now it's time to look at the rules of these static methods before we come in practice. Key rules that we have to abide, in short, of static method. Static method, they do not provide access state to any instance variable or instance method of a class. By using this terminology, I believe by this time you do understand whenever I say instance method or instance attribute. You can never access any instance variable inside a static method. That shall not be done. The second part, they are only used to group functions, grouping utility methods, right? Yeah. And in order to call them, there is a calling syntax of static method. With calling syntax, that means how can we call? Like example, when calling instance variables, what were we doing? We had to define an instance variable, or an instance variable pointing to an object. So in short, we had to create an object then that's how we used to call whatever method belongs. We used to call instance method through an instance variable. So for example, if I had a method dot get name like that, right? This is how we call instance variables. This is how we call instance method or variable. But now we are trying to define how to access or the coding syntax for static method. So the coding syntax of static method will be calling them directly by just referencing to a specific class. So book dot a static method, right? A book dot static method. That's how we'll be calling these things. All right, it's time now to shift from this theoretical explanation into examples. So the first example that I'm going to create here, it will be a temperature converter. Yeah, in temperature converter, we're going to create about two static methods that we shall observe. So class temperature converter like that, right? Yeah, just for the naming. So we shall create a class always shall have a class of an object shall always have a constructor. So this is it, Celsius. Okay, from there we have to create a reference variable name one Celsius, which will point to the same Celsius. Okay, now from here we want to create a standard instance method that will display that will retain the Celsius. So def display self, it shall return print the Celsius that the user to pass. Celsius temp self dot Celsius. That's we have returned that part. Now our core purpose of this session is to describe what static method is. Other than I described certain explanation, but always when creating a static method, you have to annotate it by using the keyword called static method. Should we do this, then we are creating static method. So in this static method, we are simply creating this function Celsius to fun element. So I'll just end here. You know what I mean. So we will be receiving a variable Celsius outside this program. When we receive this variable, then we shall return the conversion. So return what? Celsius times, and there is a standard conversion of converting Celsius to Fahrenheit kind of temperature. So by mathematically, this is the variable that is retained 9/5. Then you can test that, then plus 32. Yeah. So this is a static method that will be receiving a variable outside this temperature class, then to return the converted Celsius, right? So another issue here is, or the clarification is what you said, a static method shall never have a self as a first argument or a CLS as a first argument, because we understood the way these words work. This is for instance variable, as you can see there, and this is for a class method. Okay, I hope for now we are following. All right. Now it's time to demonstrate this basic program that we have created. The whole point here is to just demonstrate a static method and how we can call it. Sure. So that's where we create a main method. Then we said that there are two ways of calling this syntax, calling a static method. The first method, you can assign it to the result variable is equal to this temperature, right? That's where the one we have to call dot Celsius to Fahrenheit. That's how we call like that. Then we pass the variable that we want to convert. So that is Celsius degrees. So about temperature of 37 degrees. It shall return a variable we converted to Fahrenheit, sort of. Then another way to, that is the first syntax. So the second syntax of defining or calling a static method is creating an instance variable. Creating an instance variable, then you call the method inside it. So temperature, first you call the constructor, that is the constructor there. After calling the constructor, we shall pass the Celsius temperature, maybe 24. From there, then we can use this converter because it's an instance variable. As a rule, an instance variable are not limited to how this instance variable can be operated. It can also access the static method since it's part of the class, it's part of its namespace, as we are saying. Therefore, we shall do converter dot Celsius to Fahrenheit. We have to pass the argument. It has to receive a temperature of 37, and the output of this variable and this variable to be the same. All we wanted to demonstrate it is how to call the static method this way or this way. All right. Should we print this or you are comfortable with it? Okay. Let's try to learn this program and see the output. And the output that is going to bring, I think, is nothing until we print the function. Because if we can consider this part, Celsius to Fahrenheit length, it's just returning the value of this, but it's not printing. So inside this statement, we can give in the print function, then to print that temperature. Then we can also print the variable that has received the temperature. So this variable is receiving a temperature that has been converted. Wow, that's it. So we are saying print result. So we add some decoration. Yeah, temperature converted. Okay. In this program, if we don't have any errors, then we're able to see the result. Yeah, therefore, let's try to learn this program. Yeah, we shall have code the main method there and we see the output. Okay, we shall type Python, then temperature converter, then logout. Okay, exactly. This just we expect this kind of output because that's what we directed our program to do. So in this guide, we just introduce the static method and how best we can use them. We have access through a variable. This is just a variable, and calling the parent class or the class, and we call the static method. Or you can call it in other way by first creating an instance variable. How is the difference between this variable and this variable? There is explicitly difference here because a converter, when I create like this and I call the class name and I put this specifies a constructor. So whenever you put these braces to the class name and references to a certain variable, that means that variable is an instance variable, which is an object creation. Then whenever I create this variable and call a class, then I put something there like a dot. That means dot represents to access anything that belongs in there. And whenever I access anything, that is, I've accessed this method, a static method, and pass its value to this variable. So that's the difference between this converter and that converter. All right, we have closed this part of introduction to a static method. In the next session, we are going to discuss this simple exercise that we are going to create. So we are going to create a math utility class, then create a math utilities class with only static method that we are going to define. So the first static method will be calculating or be checking if the prime number is a prime. So this is a method which will contain certain implementation inside the static method to determine that. The second part of that class is going to create another static method that will be determining the greatest common divisor of between two numbers. That means whenever I access the method, whenever I call the method, then I pass 54 and 32. It has to bring me the greatest common divisor between these two variables, right? Yeah. The second part of the class is going to have a static method that will be calculating a factorial. You know what a factorial variable is, right? The second part is going to calculate the Fibonacci value. Yeah, it's going to calculate this Fibonacci value. It's another static method that will calculate the nth Fibonacci number. That means if I call that method Fibonacci, then I pass argument as 3, right? It has to bring me the number of Fibonacci starting from 0 up to 3. That means it has to output 7. I hope you understand this operation. That same applies to a factorial n, which brings the sum of the number that is passed to it from its highest to the lowest. That means if I pass 3 as a factorial, it has to bring me the sum of these variables, right? Yeah, that's what we are going to create in the next session. So stay ahead and updated, and that class you're going to find it attached to this video. Thank you. See you next